Welcome to the Heal Your Hunger Show, where we get to the heart of why you overeat and how to stop. If you struggle with food and weight like I did, welcome home. Okay, welcome everybody to the Heal Your Hunger Show. So happy to have you here. It's a great day to be alive. I'm super psyched about this day and also about my guest. If you're here for the first time, welcome. I'm so glad that you found us here at the Heal Your Hunger Show, where we talk all about emotional eating, because emotional eaters are in a class by ourselves. That's right. We're a special kind of people. So we know what it's like to be enslaved to a donut, or a candy bar, and we know what it's like to not be able to stop, and every doctor's suggestion to just moderate means nothing to us, because the M word just doesn't apply. It's not an easy thing to do for emotional eaters. So we talk about everything having to do with emotional eating here, and that's a wide range of topics, because we're people with lots of emotions and lots of struggles with food and weight, but also we're sensitive, and so we have sensitive bodies, and we have health challenges. And I think, if we've been trashing our bodies for so long with junk food and processed foods and chemicals and all kinds of stuff that we know we shouldn't eat, we end up eating anyway at the end of the night when we're tired and drained and feeling alone and unloved. We turn to these terrible foods and they're addictive. And so we eat more. And then our bodies, develop issues, right? Autoimmune issues, GI issues, all kinds of depression, anxiety. I mean, there's a whole host of issues that come up for us. We either started with those issues or we developed them after we were treating those issues with food. So you know how it goes. It goes, every which way. And we end up with all different kinds of physical ailments that need to be addressed. And so my guest today is Dr. Ken Brown, and he's a board-certified gastroenterologist who's been in practice for the past 15 years with a focus on inflammatory bowel disease and irritable bowel syndrome. And for the past 10 years, he's been conducting clinical research for various pharmacologic companies. And during this time, he saw the unmet need for something natural that could help his IBS patients find real relief. And if you've had any kind of IBS, you know that you need relief. So after working on the development of ArtronTeal for ArtronTeal. Okay, I'm going to get corrected. ArtronTeal, for over 6 years. It launched in the summer of 2015. So we're going to be talking about that today, because it's an amazing product for those suffering with symptoms of IBS and now, which we now are caused by bacterial overgrowth. So there's a lot of questions I have about this, because I personally have had SIBO, and I'm literally right now in the middle of something called the elemental diet to try to overcome it, which is something I don't recommend to anybody unless they're really desperate to overcome SIBO. So that's what I'm doing right now. Elemental diet, all that means is I eat this very strange formula for 21 days and nothing else. So I'm very hungry right now. I haven't been starving. I've been eating plenty of calories, but that does not replace real food. So here we are. I'm very hungry. I'm the host of the Heal Your Hunger Show, and welcome, Dr. Ken Brown.
Tricia, thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, great to have you. And it is such a timely topic. And congratulations, first of all, on your product and the success of your product, because I know so many people are getting incredible benefit from it. So I just have so many questions. And I really want to, before we get to your product, I really want to unpack this whole issue, because it seems so many people are affected by either IBS or SIBO now. And I think especially if, like I said, we've been trashing our bodies for a long time. So talk to me about why this is so rampant right now.
Well, I think there's a lot of different reasons why this is so rampant, but this is should be particularly interesting for your audience. You just covered a lot of things in that intro that all my patients come in with when they have these type of GI issues. They don't come in just with saying, oh, I'm having problems going to the bathroom. They talk about having severe bloating, and then they'll have anxiety, and they'll say that, the problem is I'm having some insomnia now. And things just compound on it, and they're desperate. By the time they come to me, they're very desperate, and they've got a lot of things going on. And that's where we started realizing that, oh my gosh, all health begins in the gut. You're describing the compulsion eating, and the science now is pretty cool in that we can talk right now, and I can tell you that maybe one of the reasons why this is happening is because your gut is inflamed, and it's sending signals to your brain. So when my patients come to me and I say, look, they've been told by another doctor that they have irritable bowel syndrome and it's in their head, they're very frustrated. That's extremely frustrating. If I told you, oh, it's just because you're depressed, why don't you take this antidepressant and all your problems will go away, that drives my patients nuts.
Well, so why would somebody, that seems so, that seems insane to say it's like literally in your head, like it's not happening?
Oh, I'll take it one step further. This is still going on right now. So when I went to medical school, we were actually told that irritable bowel syndrome and other problems like chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, where you have these muscle aches all the time, are all related to stress, and it's because you're depressed. Well, we used to say that 30 years ago about ulcer disease. It was thought that you developed an ulcer and you bled out because you were anxious or you had too much stress in your life. And then, of course, it was determined that there was a bacteria called H. pylori. There was an Australian gastroenterologist that had the guts to prove it. And he took a spoonful of the bacteria and caused his own ulcer and almost died from it.
Wow.
He won the Nobel Prize. Well, we're right there again here. So we've been saying for 30 years that IBS is in your head. And now we go, oh my gosh, maybe it's not. Maybe it's because bacteria is growing where it shouldn't. And that's in your small intestine. It's not that bacteria are good or bad. It's that they're just growing where they shouldn't be. We know that we have a microbiome, and that's very important for our bodies. But when the bacteria grows in the small bowel, every time you eat, your body will break down that food before you can, and then it creates all the symptoms of everything. So that's where I was 10 years ago when I was looking at this going, this is crazy. How can somebody suddenly develop IBS? And now we realize it's due to bacteria. So hence the need for a natural treatment for it.
Okay, so our small intestine is not intended to grow bacteria?
So our bodies are really good at getting the nutrients that it needs and protecting us from the outside world. If you think about it, you're always taking in a lot of bacteria and toxins, and the stomach acid, the pancreatic juice, and then the bile from the liver work very hard to keep the stomach and small bowel essentially sterile so that you can just absorb the food.
Okay.
And then as you go down through the intestines, more bacteria start to grow as it gets closer to the colon. And then in the colon, which is where your microbiome should live, you should have 100 trillion bacteria in your colon, which do amazing things for your body, but it should be located there. So our body tries to get rid of it, which is why when this happens, your body reacts like it's completely under attack and it's inflamed.
Okay, and tell me the meaning of microbiome.
Okay, microbiome is the term that we use to describe the bacteria that all of us carry. And we refer to the microbiome as an important thing to help your body survive. So your microbiome is very particular to you. And anytime that you eat and feed your body, you're also feeding your bacteria. And in turn, that bacteria will generate beneficial things for your body. I always tell my patients, it's kind of funny, we see a pregnant woman, you go, oh, she's eating for 2. I tell my patients, you should really be eating for 100 trillion at all times. If you feed your microbiome or if you feed your good bacteria, they will do good things for you. Okay,
so microbiome can be analogous with good bacteria?
Yes, we always refer to the microbiome as being the bacteria that are working with you.
Okay.
But it just refers to all the bacteria in your body.
Okay, it's just as a whole. Okay, so so when I hear that I have to restore my microbiome after this thing I'm doing for 21 days, what does that mean exactly?
So you're basically starving the bacteria and you're hoping that they will go away because you're not feeding them things that they need to survive.
Okay.
So once you start eating again, you need to give your bacteria the things that they like to eat.
Okay.
So that's what they talk about restoring it. A lot of practitioners will talk about using probiotics to help out and recolonize and that kind of thing. There's a lot of different ways to do it, but right now, you're just starving your bacteria.
Okay, so that we stop it and we stop the overgrowth that's causing the bloating in my tummy. So, and I will say the amazing thing is after 3 days doing the elemental diet, my bloating went down. I had like at least 2 inches of distension in my tummy for the past like year or two. It's been awful for an emotional eater who like really doesn't want to be fat and doesn't want to feel fat either. It sucked, you know?
Oh, for sure. Because that probably brings back a lot of issues that you've worked very hard to overcome. And then if you eat and you look pregnant, then all of a sudden all those emotional things come back with it.
Yeah, it's not a good feeling. So it felt like a miracle to me that I would have that after 3 days. But
so with you, what we're going to hope is that you starve the bacteria. One of the things that I see a lot of is that once you start eating again, the bacteria may come back. And that's one of the issues. There's lots of different diets out there. Almost all of them are all about starving the bacteria. So I hope it works for you. But don't get too discouraged if you start eating again and everything comes right back.
Well, and I've been studying kind of other, on online groups and stuff, what other people have done, and they had to take it so slowly. And SIBO does have a high recurrence rate. I totally get that. And I did mine. I've done this formula that I've been taking for I'm doing it for 21 days just for the extra, like hopefully the extra, relief to my gut. But how do you healthfully restore microbiome in your body?
The way that I do it is, first of all, I can usually get people better without doing such an extreme diet. I do recommend going on a little bit more of a paleo style diet. And what that does is it decreases the starches. The bacteria really love starches. And in the Western diet, we have some very hard to digest starches like gluten. When we make bread, that protein in gluten is very hard to digest. And I try to get my patients to at least go gluten-free. A lot of my colleagues will use a diet that you've probably come across the acronym called FODMAP.
Yep, been on it for like a year.
Oh, have you really?
Yeah.
So the FODMAP, I don't like that very much because the results are about the same as gluten, going gluten-free. Mm-hmm. But you also take out a lot of beneficial things. You take out a lot of vegetables and things that have some very good things that can feed your bacteria. What I typically will do is once we get people feeling better, when you start to eat again, I prefer to remain on a paleo type diet. That's me personally. And I think that the patients seem to feel better once they realize I'm taking, I was listening to your podcast with Tony Yoon, and he was describing, sugar and things like that. I totally agree with that we are the refined foods that you were mentioning just do a ton of bad things for us. One of them is that it gets these bacteria to have a little party. Every time you eat, they love it. So I like to get people back on a high polyphenol diet or a Mediterranean style, where the veggies, you feed your bacteria what they really want. So get rid of the bacteria, give them what they want is how I repopulate. Using the probiotics, the data is a little bit neutral on it, but if it works, awesome. If it doesn't, then we try to just feed the bacteria instead of trying to add bacteria.
So, so what was that other diet started with a P?
So polyphenols, this is something you're going to hear a whole lot more about. Mm-hmm. Polyphenols are the molecules that you will find in colored vegetables. The more colorful a vegetable is, the more polyphenols you're going to find in it. Oh. And what we've learned is that the polyphenols now are the molecules in the Mediterranean diet that probably contribute to all those beneficial health effects. I was in Spain this summer, and I'm walking around. I'd never been to Spain before. I'm walking around looking at everybody smoking, and they're eating whatever they kind of want, which includes cured meats and bread for breakfast. And then, they eat dinner real late. And I'm like, well, nobody's really morbidly obese here and all these other things. And I come back and you start looking it up, and the United States is number 1 in diabetes, number 1 in coronary disease, number 1 in dementia, number 1 in obesity, all these things. So there's more to this than what's going on. One component that I looked into is that the people in the Mediterranean region eat 5 times the amount of polyphenols that we eat.
Oh, interesting. And we're talking about red peppers, green peppers, tomatoes, all that stuff, anything colorful.
Basically, any colorful vegetable has a high polyphenol content, fruit and vegetable.
Okay.
So these polyphenols, and the reason why that I'm into that is those are the molecules that are in ArtronTeal. We purposely looked at 3 polyphenols to get rid of the bacteria and then to feed the bacteria, which is why most of my patients actually remain on it for because they just feel better. Okay. There's some really cool science coming out where, not to get too geeky, but there's scientists that are showing that when those molecules go to the colon, the bacteria are now breaking them down and they can isolate different compounds. And one of them, doesn't have to remember what it is, but one of them is called urolithin, but this is really cool. What it does is it actually tells aging cells or sick cells to go away. So you can actually have an anti-aging diet from the inside out. That's what's really neat about it.
Wow, that's super cool.
Yeah, it's going to be a field you're going to see a lot of stuff coming out with this, because the science is, I think that generally speaking, to get into the mainstream medicine, it takes about 20 years. But there is a lot of evidence right now that eating like this is probably the way to get around some of the effects of living in the United States, where we're exposed to so many toxins.
And I mean, the Mediterranean diet, that's been recommended for years, and it's a delicious way of eating. It also includes grain, though. So this is sort of like paleo version of Mediterranean.
Yeah, it's this is your listeners living here. You were discussing so many things in the intro that I wanted to hint at. Like, one of those things is the processed foods making your body very inflamed. Well, we know that certain chemicals that we spray on the crops here actually create inflammation in our bodies. And for you, if you were to eat a diet that's very high in refined foods, the wheat that we get here, corn, soy, you're taking in a lot of a chemical called glyphosate.
Okay.
Okay, so glyphosate is what we spray on the crops. That's the whole genetically modified thing.
If we don't eat organic, is that what the deal is? Or even in organic foods?
I mean, that's a little bit, I guess organic is probably the best thing that we could try to do. But we do know that it's pretty much ubiquitous now. And so so there's some really interesting stuff about how glyphosate is affecting our bodies. Glyphosate was determined to be safe by the FDA because we don't have this particular reaction that plants do. So what happens is the plants, when they absorb the glyphosate, they cannot produce essential amino acids or amino acids that they need to survive, one of them being tryptophan. So tryptophan is an essential amino acid that we need to take in as humans, because tryptophan goes up through the liver, gets converted to serotonin, goes up to the brain, and works to keep the brain healthy. Without it, serotonin goes down and depression goes up and inflammation goes up and all these other things. So by eating a high refined diet, not just the sugars, which feed the bacteria, but you're taking in a lot of this glyphosate, which really can make you depressed. So now we're starting to put the pieces together as we look at this.
Interesting. And I'd never thought of, I mean, when I think of tryptophan, I think of turkey, but not vegetables. Vegetables create tryptophan? So
the vegetables can actually create some tryptophan. And when they can't, then they die. Other essential amino acids also. But when the glyphosate prevents them from doing that, here's the real kicker. So the FDA said that glyphosate is safe for humans and mammals because we lack that enzyme. But guess what? The bacteria in our body don't lack the enzyme. So they can convert the glyphosate into the toxic component that's doing this to the plants. So that's how come we're starting to see just years of using that to spray in the crops. And now we have essentially this diabetes, obesity, autism epidemic, and it's all related. And it gets compounded if you have bacterial overgrowth. because you're feeding them, they get excited, they convert these chemicals, and then it becomes this vicious cycle. So a lot of what's going on where, I'm putting on weight, I'm depressed, my belly's swollen, I have insomnia, I have anxiety, all these things that you talked about can all be tied into gut inflammation. And unfortunately, living in the United States, it's almost impossible to avoid some of it.
Yeah, that's crazy bad news.
Except good news. Number one, if you treat your microbiome, meaning if you feed the bacteria what they want, and if you get rid of the bacteria where it shouldn't be, then you're setting yourself up for a little bit of a win here.
Right.
One of the things that's really cool is those polyphenol molecules that I was talking about.
Yep.
Those actually can help raise the tryptophan level. So they will actually go and help you compensate for that. So the bacteria will use those and compensate for the continual insult that keeps happening all the time. So it isn't a doom and gloom,
right?
But heal yourself from the inside is the key to this.
So true. I just love that message. Of course, that's the Heal Your Hunger message. So, so what other, so let's get specific. I mean, I've got the colorful foods. I've got them in mind. Red peppers, that's my go-to every time I go to the farmer's market every week. Red peppers and tomatoes, lettuce, and those kinds of things. What other kinds of food are good for building your microbiome?
Prebiotics, meaning anything that's going to go to the colon essentially undigested.
Okay.
So
that's what prebiotic means. I did not know that.
Yeah, prebiotic. So probiotic is taking in the bacteria directly. Prebiotic, all it is anything that goes to the colon where your bacteria can use it for fuel. So fibers, for instance, can actually do this. Different types of fibers, but basically if you take in a fiber like psyllium husk or acacia senegal, they go to the colon where the bacteria then can use those as anti-inflammatory things. The polyphenols, the more colorful something is, so blueberries are real big, bilberry is really big. They have a high polyphenol content. What we use here that probably has the highest is something called quebracho, which is a tannin, and tannins are used in the food supply. The beauty of the quebracho in ArtronTeal is that it doesn't get absorbed. We specifically use that one so that it could get rid of the bacteria in the small bowel and make its way to the colon, where then the colonic bacteria can break it down. So anything that you're providing fuel to the colon and making it all the way there. The refined sugars and all that stuff, that just gets broken down and absorbed before it can ever actually help out your colonic bacteria.
Okay, so let's talk about ArtronTeal.
My belly's better.
Oh, sweet. Okay, so I have some here because I gave my box away with one of these pages of capsules to a friend of mine who came over, was bloated the other day. So I said, here, take this. But this is what I'm getting is this product is not treating symptoms. This is treating the root problem.
Correct. So this all started when I was actually doing some drug development. I was working in clinical research for treating IBS with diarrhea. I was working with a pharmaceutical company that was they were trying to develop an antibiotic to do this. And at that time, I realized that they were missing something very big here, which is the bloating is actually caused by the bacteria growing where it shouldn't be. And I started to look at different ways to fix that problem. And we came across a lot of data on decreasing gas in cattle for the ozone effect, which is kind of funny because science was already there. I just had to piece it together. And so we put 3 ingredients together, 3 polyphenols that, number 1, starve the bacteria, number 2, weaken the bacteria, and 3, block the gas producing enzyme that actually produces a gas called methane. So by using the 3 together, we're able to really kind of get the bacteria out of where it shouldn't be and then feed the normal bacteria. We did 2 clinical trials on it. We basically can say, I tell my patients, really 4 out of 5 people do really well on this if you take it right. Which is, this is not a take it and I hope it works. This is a process of getting rid of the bacteria. You're on the elemental diet, you're going to do it for 21 days. We know that these bacteria can be very stubborn. So taking it for at least that is really the key, 2-3 times a day.
Interesting. And is it one capsule 2 to 3 times a day?
No, our studies actually have shown that there is some dosing dependency to it. So 2-3 times a day seems to be the sweet spot. There are some people that can get away with less, and actually some people that need a little bit more, but we can really help 4 out of 5 people.
So would this be an alternative treatment for, I mean, is it a treatment? Can you consider it a treatment for SIBO or IBS?
Most of my patients, yes, it is considered a treatment. There are a subset of patients where because of motility issues or because your intestines don't move as well as they should, you're going to be at risk for developing it again. And those people tend to take courses of it periodically every few months. Most of my patients take it and then they're done, but they remain on it because they never want to get back to where they were before. And they actually start feeling better overall because it's being used by your bacteria for something good. So most of the time, this is not a Band-Aid. When it does work, it does seem to really get the bacteria out of there and you're back to normal. That's my goal when I treat patients.
Yeah, that's amazing. And then, but you recommend it in conjunction, obviously, with the paleo, the diets that you recommend.
I try to, and so my patient population, sometimes it's hard to change diet. I mean, this is the Heal Your Hunger show. You have a lot of listeners out there who struggle with doing some different things. So the diet is just there to help out. You're extremely disciplined to do an elemental diet. I can't get any of my patients to even go gluten-free, and we still have success with it. Paleo is my personal preference because I feel better on it. So it took a little while for me to figure this out. I guess that's the irony of being a gastroenterologist and not realizing that I was actually gluten intolerant. And it was pretty funny because I went years and years and years with what I considered normal bathroom issues, but they were very abnormal. And then once I went gluten-free, I'm like, wow, I feel a whole lot better.
Wow.
So personally, I recommend it because that's the lifestyle that I live. And I just feel better because of it. And so that's the one that I actually try and tell people. But gluten sensitivity is actually another thing that I can actually eat gluten as long as I take ArtronTeal with it. If I don't, I'm a wreck and the rest of the day is kind of shot. So we know that I'll back up a little bit. You mentioned something in the very, very beginning about autoimmune. We now know that this whole process leads to something called leaky gut or intestinal permeability.
Yep.
What your doctor will listen to. If you go into your doctor and say leaky gut, most of the time they will stick their head in the sand and ignore it because that doesn't exist or it didn't exist when they trained. But now we realize that probably bacterial overgrowth, SIBO, gluten ingestion, which our bodies produce something called zonulin, and our diet, we just talked about glyphosate, lead to leaky gut. Leaky gut leads to a couple things. It can lead to inflammation, and that inflammation leads to antibodies being produced. And those antibodies are what causes autoimmune disease.
Oh my goodness.
It's really interesting because if we can stop the cycle, then we can stop a lot of this. We know that autism, obesity, and autoimmune disease have been exponentially growing over the last probably 10 years. I mean, exponential. It's an epidemic.
Totally. Absolutely.
And if we're going to talk to your audience about this, we're going to talk about hunger and things like that, something that maybe, I don't know if you're aware of, but once you have intestinal permeability, so you, with bacterial overgrowth, when you eat something starchy, your intestinal lining, you have these cells that reach up and they sample the outside world and they go, oh my gosh, we've got a little mini war going on right here. We need to increase some troops and do things. So they start this inflammatory cascade. Well, one of the things that's there underneath the lining is something called a mast cell, M-A-S-T. Mast cells, they get irritated also, and they dump histamine on a nerve. So that nerve then becomes irritated, goes straight up to the brain and tells the brain something bad's going on. And now we even know that there is some really cool science about addiction and compulsion, where you have different histamine receptors in your brain, and one of them being H2 and H3. As it turns out that when those get inflamed and histamine starts dumping in your brain, it actually, many things happen, like when you eat sugar or have alcohol, it appears to interfere with your brain's ability to actually control it and cope, and it gets more worked up, produces more histamine, and then that's where this addiction and compulsion comes from. So there's even some evidence that the gut is actually controlling your brain. So
that's amazing. And it is, it just seems like in the past 10 years, that is the evidence in the science now that, how intelligent our guts are, and how that is the control center. And we didn't used to know that.
We've always discussed the brain-gut axis, and we've always said that people with irritable bowel syndrome tend to have more sensitive bellies. And now we understand why. It's actually true chemicals that are going on.
Yeah.
I mentioned earlier that when you don't have tryptophan, your serotonin goes down. So then your coping ability and your happiness drops also. So you have these people they're like, am I going crazy here? Because there's so much going on and the doctor says everything's normal. I'm not right. And when you start breaking it down and going, look, this happens, then this happens, then this happens in your brain. And that's why it's becoming harder to deal with a lot of these issues.
Yeah, God, everything is connected. So the leaky gut is caused by the IBS and the SIBO. It doesn't precede it?
Correct. So having an infection or SIBO can cause these, what we're calling tight junctions. So all it is our bodies are very good at sampling the outside world and absorbing what it needs to and not getting infected by something. Because if it absorbs too much, then we have bacterial infections. So when you do go someplace and you get sick, let's say you're traveling and you eat something, you're somewhere, a street taco, and you get sick that night. So your body then samples it and goes, uh-oh, we've got this bacteria up there. And then the cells will mobilize, go up and fight it. So let's say you have salmonella, shigella. We hear all these things, E. coli outbreak, this and that. Well, our bodies, the reason why people don't die from it is because our bodies fight it off.
Right.
But so when that happens, that's one infection, and then it's one and done. The body's like, woo, we won, it's gone. When you have bacterial overgrowth, they sample it, they kind of react to it, and they fight it a little bit, and then they come back and they go, oh, it's still there. And they react to it and they fight it a little bit. Well, because of this little bit of fighting that's going on, it actually allows these tight junctions or these gates to open up just a little bit. And when that happens, it allows more of a reaction. And then it becomes this circle. The other molecule that I mentioned is called zonulin. And that's when we react. If you're gluten sensitive or if you have celiac disease, your body will react to that. It'll do the same thing. And then the final thing is that food. So those three things can come in, create the leaky gut that then leads to this whole process. And it is my opinion, and there's a lot of other people out there that feel this way, that this intestinal permeability is probably the root cause of all inflammation. I did mention that the U.S. is #1 in diabetes.
Yeah, you did mention that.
Dementia. I travel around to find different lecturers that are really doing some cool science on this stuff. And I went to a meeting in Florida where there's a celiac expert, a pediatric gastroenterologist named Dr. Fasano, who's done a lot of work on this. And I was blown away that he sat there and described how leaky gut is probably the cause of autism and obesity with some very good inflammatory models. And then I was in Austin, and a guy named Dr. Perlmutter who wrote Grain Brain.
I've seen him speak before.
Yeah,
in Austin.
Yeah, he's a great speaker and
yeah.
Very. I love the fact that he's a neurologist and he's talking gut health for the brain. And then he was talking about how intestinal permeability is one of the causes of dementia. So here I have one guy doing cradle. I have one guy talking grave, and they're both talking brain health, and it's from the gut.
Yeah.
One of the reasons why I had mentioned one of the things to feed your colonic bacteria is a fiber called acacia. It's because he showed that bacteria will raise a hormone called BDNF. And what that does is that allows your brain to heal itself. And so there's just lots of really cool things. All these guys are getting away from their primary organs. I'm waiting for the cardiologist to start coming over. I think Dr. William Davis wrote Wheat Belly.
Right.
I think he wrote the Wheat Belly one. He's a cardiothoracic surgeon or cardiologist. And I love the fact that he's just talking gut all the time now. He's like, let's quit treating the end organ. Let's go right to the source.
Yeah. It is. That's the beautiful thing, is that everybody's onto it now, and we're making amazing progress. Yeah,
we've seen some, and this is, as you know, this is an over-the-counter product. It is a natural product. Mm-hmm. We're not making any claims about what it can do, but what we've seen is some incredible things where parents have said, listen, I don't know what's going on, but after treating the bacterial overgrowth, my son's behavior issues have improved. I'm like, oh, well, here's what I think is going on. I think that we've protected that barrier and you're not having this chronic inflammatory process going on. And that chronic inflammatory process can lead to ADHD, autism, whatever you want to do. All comes down to inflammation.
Yeah, it's amazing. And in terms of healing the leaky gut, does this product contribute to that as well?
We've got some evidence that shows by getting rid of the bacteria that works very well. And we also know that the different polyphenols in there can actually tighten those junctions, but we really developed it for bacterial overgrowth. I'm working with a new lab. I'm glad you asked that because we're going to solve a few of these questions. A new lab called Vibrant Wellness has asked me to come on board and really look at some of the leaky gut markers that they believe we can determine if people have this. And so I'm taking people, probably going to do a study where I'm going to take them, get their markers like zonulin levels, and there's all these other different ones called lipopolysaccharides and things like that. And we're going to see, and then we're going to treat them with different things, one of them being ArtronTeal. And if we can lower that, then we know that we're having some improvement. So we have objective data. Why that I think is really important is because my colleagues, my traditionally trained gastroenterology colleagues, probably will not listen to any of this until you have some objective data. Look, right. We've got A, we've got B, they're better. Here's what's going on. And I think that, that's really necessary because we have to have evidence-based medicine. But once we started doing evidence-based medicine, then it became money-based medicine where big pharma sort of controlled what evidence came out.
Right.
So somebody like me, when we did our clinical studies in ArtronTeal, I paid for it. I just said, I really want to know if this works. So it was out of pocket. And this is going to be the same thing with this one. But fortunately, we have some companies like Vibrant Wellness and some different people that are willing to, help out just so we can prove the science.
Yeah, it's really a backward model. You guys should be getting the money.
Yeah, so I think that there's hopefully we'll start helping people with bacterial overgrowth and IBS. And some of my science is now going to be shifting, much more towards the autoimmune process, the leaky gut process, looking at a lot of cool things like CBD oil, cannabinoid oil, which I think is underutilized in medicine. And there's.
Are those, I was going to ask you about how people can self-treat for leaky gut.
I think, there's a lot of misinformation out there. Mm-hmm. And the biggest thing is those three things, make sure that we get rid of because we know that they're affecting your intestinal barrier: bacterial overgrowth, zonulin levels, and then the diet, the refined diet, because it's got not just feeding the bacteria, but it's got these chemicals in it that can actually affect that. So the best way to do it is to get rid of the bacteria and then really change your diet, which is that's kind of where I'm going, like a heavy plant-based paleo style, I think is a very good diet. I see a lot of patients lose a lot of weight. They feel better. their overall inflammation decreases. A lot of people with like arthritis, but now it makes sense. It's not coincidence. These people feel better because you're decreasing this inflammatory cascade.
Absolutely. And it's just, my hypothesis is that just about all disease is directly or indirectly caused by emotional eating. That's where I come from, because, it seems like diet is the cause of so many diseases, and then diet is the solution to so many diseases. And so it just, it sort of like begs the question, well, you just fix your diet, you'll be better. Well, why aren't people doing that? Well, it's because of emotional eating. Like, people can't, they can't eat better even though they know better. And that's really the crux of the problem from where I sit.
Absolutely. There's, I'm not an addiction and compulsion expert at all, but it is pretty interesting that if you were to take a step back and say, well, is my microbiome here for me, or am I here for it? So when you start eating a certain diet, it starts allowing certain bacteria to grow more than others, and you get less variety. So some of the compulsion and the addiction could be because you have these bacteria that are used to a certain diet going, feed me. It's that old, just feed me, this is what I want. And now you're eating for them. You don't even realize it, but it's a series of serotonin and histamine levels that are changing. And you've got insulin going on that's creating some low sugar. And some of it may be a little bit out of your control, or it's an uphill battle. Let's put it that way. It's an uphill battle because the rest of the system is kind of broken outside of the whole mental aspect of it.
Yeah. And that's also why, at least, in my course, in my book, I mean, it's really about creating so many more supports. I mean, nobody can just follow a diet when they have been addicted to food. I mean, you can't just do an about face and start eating better, because you've left a huge gap. And either whether it's physically or emotionally, and it's usually both. But on the emotional side, there's so many things that people can do to give themselves emotional support so that they can wean themselves off the foods that they've been so dependent on. And that's just so key, because just doing this in a vacuum is virtually impossible for the emotional eater.
I found it interesting on your website that you discuss a few other types of addiction, sexual addiction. You reference alcohol as kind of all being under the same umbrella.
Yeah. It's true. Well, it's because the solution to these things, everybody's got sort of their addiction du jour, the thing that they're really into. And there's usually more, though, and because why stop at one? That's my philosophy. Getting some relief, why don't you go all the way? So, and that's the addict, that's the addict mindset. But they do all have the same root cause. I mean, we're treating emotions, and we're treating a lot of things with these addictions. And so and unfortunately, a lot of people do, I call it switching deck chairs on the Titanic, where they do get one under the control, but it's just at the surface level. And so the same basic, fundamental emotional need is still there. And that's why they switch to other addictions.
Yeah.
And it's even, people who have had gastric bypass surgery, now there's an epidemic of people with having had the surgery switching to alcohol and becoming alcoholics, because they still have that fundamental need for their fix. They got to get their emotional fix. They can't get it from their binges, right? So they're finding a better way to feed, another alternative way to get their fix and then numb their pain, their emotional pain. And so the alcoholism's on the rise from that. So
isn't that interesting? Yeah. Not to turn everything back to the bacteria, but I think you'll get a kick out of this. We were looking to hire a new doctor, and he happened to be a researcher out of Yale. And we took him out to dinner to the steakhouse. It was really funny because he was telling me about his research. And what he was doing is he was taking skinny and fat mice, and he was doing colonic stool transplants, meaning he was taking the poop from one mouse and giving it to the other in an enema. And he was able to take a skinny mouse and make that mouse suddenly start gaining weight, and vice versa. And it was very funny because the waitress, she was listening in and she was super interested in all this. And she was, clearly just a little bit overweight. And I think was just interested in the whole aspect of manipulating the microbiome for that. And so she interrupts and she goes, so what are you saying? He goes, well, I'm just saying that maybe there's some evidence that maybe a family that lives together that all happen to be, struggling with weight may have some difficulty, not just because of how they're eating, but possibly because they're sharing the same microbiome. If you live long enough with somebody, you're going to start developing the same microbiome. And it was really funny because she looks up and the busboy, who's got to be 6'4", 130 pounds, sopping wet. She goes, so that guy just became the sexiest guy in this place. And we started laughing like that. And you can start dating a really skinny person or a really tall, skinny person and try and get the microbiome switched and see what happens. But
that's so funny. and a new relationship was born.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, this has been such an enlightening conversation, Ken. I really appreciate your coming on and talking with us about this. And you're offering a discount for people who want to try this product. And I'll have that link here underneath in the show notes at healyourhunger.com under the podcast link. So,
and I want your listeners to know we do have a 100% money back guarantee. We really do want to help people. So if you don't bloat after you eat, then we may not be able to help you. If you want to take it for the polyphenol effect, go right ahead. But we really want to help those people. And if it doesn't work, let us know. I'm trying to get some data on people that it doesn't work on. Let's find, roughly 20% of the people, what's going on? Is it, because that's pretty much what my practice is now. Fortunately or unfortunately, I just get people who have failed because it's become extremely successful and they show up holding my bottle and I'm like, oh no, that was my last chance. And then we start learning new things. So if any of your listeners get this and it doesn't work, there's a money back guarantee. They do get a discount. lovemytummy.com/Tricia, I believe it is.
Yep.
Just go to lovemytummy.com/Tricia and get a 10% discount. And like I said, money back guarantee, but I do want to know, we at least want to get some feedback. I tried it.
Okay, great.
3 times a day, because we need to help each other is what it comes down to.
Yeah.
As a community, you're helping all these people with the Heal Your Hunger show. We want to help people that have bacterial overgrowth. And in the end, in the middle of it all, we're going to figure it out how to stop the inflammation, so that we're not leading the world in diabetes and coronary disease, autism, and all that stuff. And it kind of starts out here in these kind of situations. So I'm very, very thankful for people like you that go through the trouble of putting a show on like this.
Well, I appreciate it. It's a labor of love. And it's really, I'm probably the best and the greatest beneficiary because I get to learn so much and it's just so illuminating. So thank you so much. I have one parting question for you, Ken, and I ask all my guests this. And what is your deepest hunger?
Ooh, my deepest hunger. I would say that my deepest hunger is to remain curious and keep learning. I really want to bridge this gap between the traditional medicine, like where I come from, and the natural world. And I think the answer lies somewhere in there. So it's just curiosity. Curiosity makes you learn more. I
love that. I wish all doctors had that same curiosity. So my deepest hunger is that, or one of my deepest hungers is that others catch on they have the fire that you have. So thank you so much. Really great to have you here.
Thank you, Tricia.
If you enjoyed this show and want to get free support, insider health info, exclusive invites to events, and more, visit healyourhunger.com.